we were at the very end of Zechariah. My intention was to finish it, and we did not quite get there. Only got 2 verses left. When I look at these 2 verses, I'm reminded somewhat of Friday of Thanksgiving week. Got some leftovers. But the good news is, amongst these leftovers, there's some pecan pie we've got to pull out yesterday. So, something good left. It's not all quite as leftover as can be. I remember growing up, I had a good friend named Joe. His stepfather was named Jim. And Jim was not a fan of leftovers. And he actually said one time, he was talking about Mexican food, he said one of the staples of their diet is called refried beans. He said, refried beans, I'll just call it what it is, leftovers. It sounds so popular. Yeah. All right, so in the final 2 verses, he's been talking about God's city, Jerusalem, which represents the church. And he's been talking about it in verse 16, 17, 18, and 19 as a worshiping city. We spent some time talking about how he appropriately singled out the Feast of Tabernacles because that was the one that Gentiles could participate in, and how that was an appropriate feast to single out to signify the Gentiles coming into the church and receiving those covenant blessings. But in verses 20 and 21, the text says, in that day there shall be upon the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, and every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts. And all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them and seed therein. And in that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. So, in that day there shall be bells. There shall be upon the bells of the horses. Their horses often had for decorations, or sometimes even for the noise in battle. Bells placed there. Because if the bells were going off as they were going to battle, they wouldn't hear some of the noise of the battle and they wouldn't get scared the way horses do. I know if you ever watch many westerns, sometimes when the guns go off, the horse will buck up and throw the cowboy off the back of the horse, right? One of the things that would overcome that with was by putting bells on them. But those bells, which were used, as I said, oftentimes in war, even the bells would have holiness unto the Lord. Now, that phrase, holiness unto the Lord, is not something we're really familiar with because that phrase is not really a New Testament phrase. I want to show it to you. Go back, hold your finger there, go back with me to Exodus 28. So we can understand what he's saying. In Exodus 28, look at verse 36. Starting at 30, he's talking about the Urim and the Thummim. That's the means by which God speaks to his people. Then in 31, he starts talking about the ephod. Then in 36, he starts talking about the mitre. And the mitre was the turban, if you will. New King James says turban on top of the high priest. He wore a turban on his head. Look what it says, verse 36. And thou shalt make a plate of full pure gold, engrave or engrave upon it, like the engravings of a signet, holiness to the Lord. And thou shalt put it on a blue lace, that it may be upon the mitre, and upon the forefront of the mitre it shall be. And it shall be upon Aaron's forehead, and that Aaron may bear the iniquity of the holy things which the children of Israel shall hallow in their holy gifts. It shall always be upon his forehead, that they may be accepted before the Lord. Thou shalt embroider the coat of fine linen, and thou shalt make the mitre or the turban of fine linen, and thou shalt make the girdle of needlework. So if you can picture this, we know what a turban is in the Middle East, right? So embroidered on that turban is this phrase, holiness unto the Lord. And who wears that turban? Only one person. Aaron and his descendants who ascend not into the priesthood, but into the very specific role of the high priest. And what does he say over here? He says, in that day there shall be on the bells of the horses holiness unto the Lord. In other words, these insignificant tinkling little bells on horses going into battle would be just as holy as the high priest himself entering in on the Day of Atonement. Can you picture that? That's how holy he's saying God's people are going to be under the new covenant. Keep reading. Look what he says next. And the pots. Now, again, hold your finger there, go back with me to Exodus 27 again. These are things we're not familiar with because we don't know Exodus well enough to understand Zechariah maybe, but hold your finger, go to Exodus 27 and verse 3. He's got the tabernacle there and the altar and the tabernacle. So this is the place where the sacrifices of the Day of Atonement are going to be offered. At this altar, here's how you make it. It's going to be 4 square and so forth. Verse 2, make the horns on it, 4 corners. The horns should be the same. Verse 2, overlay with brass. Thou shalt make the pans, there's our word, the pans to receive his ashes, his shovels, his basins, his flesh hook, his fire pans, all the vessels thereof are made of brass. So what he says here, and the pots, he's talking about the pots used in the sanctuary in the Lord's house. These are the pots that held the ashes of the sacrifice. Alright? Shall be like the bowls before the altar. Like the bowls that held the sacrificial blood. Look at Exodus 28:3. I can find it. And thou shalt speak unto those that are wise-hearted, whom I have filled with the spirit of wisdom. They will make Aaron's garments consecrate. He may minister them in the priest office. Let's see. So in other words, everything under the new covenant is going to be holy. You know the book of Hebrews? Now turn over to Hebrews. All right. The Zechariah passage. Turn over to Hebrews. All right. Hebrews chapter 9. We're going to start, I think, by verse 20 or so. Verse 19. When the law had spoken every precept to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of calves of goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book and all the people, saying, this is the blood of the testament God enjoined upon you. Moreover, he sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and the vessels of the ministry. And almost all things are by the law purged with blood. And without the shedding of blood is no remissions. It was therefore necessary that by the pattern of things in the heavens should be purified with these. but the heavenly things with better sacrifices than these. So he's contrasted there under the old covenant the fact that the blood, and he's going to go on to talk about in Hebrews 10, that this is the blood of what? Bulls and goats. So the blood of bulls and goats was what was used, and the blood of bulls and goats did what? It purified under the old covenant and made those objects and vessels, everything that blood of bulls and goats touched under the old covenant was made holy. But under the new covenant, what does it say, verse 24? For Christ is not in the holy place made with hands, which are figures of the true, but to heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not yet that he should offer himself often as the high priest into the holy place every year with the blood of others. For then must he have suffered since the foundation of the world. But once in the world he appeared to put away sin by what? The sacrifice not of bulls and goats, but of himself. As is the point of once a man to die, and after that the judgment, so Christ offered himself once to bear the sins of many, and for them, and to them that look to him he shall appear the second time without sin unto salvation. You know, we quote that passage in verse 27 so often to make the point, and it is a point that can be made from the passage, that we only get one chance at the salvation thing. Point of man, once to die, after that the judgment. That's not the apostle's point. The apostle's point is, this is something you already know, and I'm using that to make the comparison. The comparison is, just as we all know we only get one crack at life. Christ, it only took one time for him to take away the sins of every man for all time. Yes. Whereas animal sacrifices had to be repeated. What's he going to say in Hebrews 10? For the law, having the shadow of good things to come and not the very image of the things, can never, with those sacrifices offered year by year continually, make the comers thereunto perfect. If they had been able to do the job, then they would have what? Ceased to be offered. You wouldn't have to keep doing it. And why did I say all that? Because that's exactly what he's talking about in the book of Zechariah. This is why this is so beautiful of a way to close this book out. Go back with me and look at it. When he says, back in Zechariah 14, the pots in the Lord's house should go out the bowls before the altar. What were the pots? That's what they used to take the ashes away. Are ashes clean or dirty? Dirty. This is the dirtiest thing involved in worship. The dirtiest part of worship. And even that, the dirtiest part of our worship will be just as holy under the new covenant as the holiest part of worship under the old covenant. Isn't that beautiful? We are what God intended from the beginning. He intended from the beginning to purify himself a people zealous unto good works. He told his people back in Exodus 19, I will make a nation that is a priesthood. Then in 1 Peter 2, verse 5 and verse 9, he says, you are a royal priesthood. In other words, he brings together the kingdom of Judah and the kingdom of Levi into one, makes it the church in the image of who? The Son, who is a descendant both of Judah and a descendant not of Levi, but who? Melchizedek, whose priesthood is superior to that of Levi. Yes, sir.
So I was thinking about how much better covenant we have. Remember when Christ was working some miracles and they were all amazed at the miracles? And Christ said something to the effect that the least of the kingdom would do greater things than these. Mm-hmm. And then I thought about the other scripture that said the prayers of the righteous avail much. It's like everything is better. Everything is more powerful.
Which is what Hebrews says repeatedly. Yeah. Everything is better. This new covenant is so much better. But man wants to go back on the old covenant. Think about it. People say all the time, oh, if I could have been back there when Jesus lived and just seen the miracles. He lived by the old covenant. He lived by the old covenant. You got to get that?
Yeah. Most of us have been dead.
He lived on the old covenant, and we could not have received the promises we have now had we lived then.
Yes.
We could have got stoned.
We could have got stoned, yeah. We could have got a lot of things. But all this is what Zechariah is talking about in Zechariah 14. In that day, in other words, the most mundane, common thing that you could do in the church, I don't even know what that would be. If you're the person who goes through and picks up the communion cups, I'm just making that up, that people have left because they didn't follow the directions and put them in the trash receptacle like they're supposed to. If that's your job, that is better than being high priest under the old covenant. So when you have these little quote-unquote jobs that you get tasked to or voluntold to or volunteered to or asked to do, realize this plane on which you're being placed. Because this covenant, everything is better. Everything is better. You know, would you rather be the backup quarterback in the NFL or the starting quarterback on the Pee Wee football team? Okay. You'll make up your mind here. It don't matter, does it? What matters is to realize the blessings that you have received from God because of where He's placed you. In fact, in Hebrews 11, look what he actually goes on to say at the end of that story of all those people of faith. He talks about them and he builds up, oh, how great they were. And at the end of the chapter he says, verse 38, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and dens and caves. And all these, all having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. God having provided some better things for us. Wow. We got something better than Abraham. Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Gideon, Samson, Barak, and all the rest of those people in Hebrews 11. Despite our imperfect faith that we might possess compared to them, we got something better. Yes, sir.
You know, this is an amazing point that you've made. And
it's amazing point. Zechariah, man, I'm reading it.
yeah, but what really kind of upsets me is how people take this for granted. And he's so entitled and so unappreciative that they sit around in the church and complain and want to spread discord with the church.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And like I said before, if you could take the blessings that God gave under the old covenant, where He gave, if you just look at it, more financial blessings and fewer spiritual blessings. And today He appears to give more spiritual blessings and fewer financial blessings. Most people are Esau. They'd make the trade just like that. Give me the pottage. I want that pottage. And I want it now. Because I can't wait. I'm about to starve to death. What good is these spiritual blessings going to do me when I starve to death? Too many Esau's out there. This is what we're going to study in Malachi. pecan pie. All right, last verse. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto the Lord of hosts. Every one of us is just as holy as the high priest himself on the Day of Atonement. Now, he didn't wear that turban every day. And all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them and seethe therein. And in that day shall be no more Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. The former distinctions between the sacred and the secular would be a thing of the past. No more distinction between the outer court, the holy place, the most holy place. Have you noticed that in the church? Where's our holy place and our inner court and our outer court? Where's that at?
Only holy place.
That's right. What about under the new covenant? Clean and unclean. He's signifying what's going to be told to Peter in Acts 10 right here. See? Every pot shall be holiness unto the Lord. No clean and unclean distinctions anymore. No distinction between the people, the priests, and the Levites anymore. All the people are going to be holy to the Lord. That's why I know that the passages above, when he talks about the Feast of the Tabernacles, cannot be a return to the law of Moses, because we're going to serve under a system that's so much greater than the law of Moses. It's a messianic age. And all the sacrifice shall come and take them and seethe therein. And that day there shall be no more Canaanite. When you hear the word Canaanite, understand he's talking about outcasts. That's the idea of that promise I've already alluded to, that's found in Exodus 19, but never ever actually fulfilled under the Old Covenant. Exodus 19 and verse 6. My cold hands work it. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words that thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Then look at Revelation chapter 21, verse 27. And there shall in no wise enter in anything that defileth, neither whatsoever maketh abomination or maketh a lie, but those which are written in the Lamb's book of life. This is because, according to the Ephesians 5 language, the church is supposed to be presented to Christ without spot, wrinkle, blemish, however you want to translate those words, or any such thing one day. In its purity and its simplicity. That's the way the church is supposed to be presented to Christ. So the Canaanite's not part of it anymore. Unclean person. There is no unclean. Didn't look this passage up, so I can't get it off the top of my head. But the wayfaring stranger shall not err therein. E-R-R. Err therein. Isaiah has to tell us. So anyway, that's how Zechariah closes that. Message is, the coming kingdom is going to be so great that you can't even begin to compare it to anything that they can envision of the Old Covenant. All right, that gets us to old Malachi. Malachi, his name literally means my messenger. My messenger. We don't know anything else about him, unfortunately. We're not given even his genealogy here. We're not given his occupation. You know, some prophets, he was a priest, or he was a sower, or whatever. Nothing. Just introduced to him right here. The burden of to Israel by Malachi. The date of the book is somewhere around, start with the broadest terms, about 450 to 400 BC. I say that because the temple has been rebuilt. If you look at verse 10 of Malachi 1, You can see the temple's been rebuilt. The sacrifices being brought back to the temple. Also, chapter 3, verse 1 implies the temple has been rebuilt after the destruction that took place under Nebuchadnezzar. That didn't take place until 5:15, 5:16, something like that. So we've nearly done that far. We're also shown in verse 8 that they are ruled by something called a governor. Offer to thy governor. And that was something that took place in the Persian period. The Persian period was from 539 to 332 BC, where they were ruled by governors. But the most compelling evidence that that's the time is if you look at the parallels between Malachi and Nehemiah, and we're going to do that as we finish up this introduction today, before we get to the text we'll work with next week. But the background of it, all right, 606, first destruction of Jerusalem. 597, second destruction of Jerusalem. 586, Jerusalem totally destroyed and the temple has been destroyed. The rest of the exiles, pretty much everybody goes into, except for the poorest land, goes into captivity. And there are a few fugitives left behind. They're governed by Gedaliah. But Gedaliah, at the end of 2 Kings, is assassinated by Ishmael, who's the royal prince. And Nebuchadnezzar does not like that because he has appointed Gedaliah to be the governor. And that rocks on until finally Cyrus the Great, king of Persia, takes over Babylon in 539. When he takes over, he sets forth an edict for the children of Israel to return to their land, as Daniel had predicted. In Ezra chapter 2, if you look there, you will see reference to this edict. Ezra 2. Now these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity that's carried away to Nebuchadnezzar. They came back to Jerusalem to their cities. Which came with Zerubbabel. So Zerubbabel led this number of people back. You've got a long list of those names given there, including the priests. Finally, when you total it all up in verse 64, there are 42,360 people that return with Zerubbabel from that first return that was allowed by Cyrus. And that authorized the rebuilding of the temple and the reestablishment of religion. But of course, we know from our earlier studies they did not rebuild the temple because they got back, they laid the foundation of the temple, and they said, what? We think we'll start building our own houses right now. You know, we got to invest in our own stuff, not in the Lord's house. So God has to call them back through the prophet Haggai to rebuild the temple so that they can be blessed. And he says, listen, told you I'd take care of you financially if you take care of me. But you have to take care of me. Ezra tells that story, Ezra 6, 13 through 15. And so that takes place. Nehemiah comes back then and helps with the rebuilding of the wall. And that story is told about somewhere around 20th year of Artaxerxes. So that's 45 minus 24, 25 or so. Nehemiah returns and helps to rebuild the wall. Then he later comes back and finds Israel in shambles. That's what I want to focus on with these parallels between Nehemiah and Malachi. So hold your finger with Malachi, and we're going to go to Nehemiah and just flip back and forth a little bit to show you that we're dealing with the same time, if you will. Find Nehemiah. Here we go. All right. In Nehemiah 13, 11 through 14, again. How about it? He says, I perceive, this is Nehemiah the governor, the portion of the Levites had not been given. The Levites and the singers did work, were fled everyone his field. Then contended I with the ruler and said, why is the house of God forsaken? I gathered them together and set them into place, and brought all Judah the tithe of the corn, the new wine, the oil of the treasuries. So what's he saying there? And I made treasures over the treasuries. He called them by name. He said, remember me, O God, concerning this, why I've done out my good deed that I've done for the house of God and for the offices thereof. In other words, Israel had neglected to give God the tithe they were supposed to give that would result in the temple being taken care of and the Levites being able to serve the temple. Since Israel was not doing that, the Levites weren't serving the temple. What were they doing? Back having to work their fields. So God's work was being neglected. Hold your finger there. Go with me to Malachi chapter 3. Starting in verse 8. Will a man rob God? And we'll deal with this in depth when we get to it. Will a man rob God? Yet you rob me. He said, where do we rob thee? In tithes and in offerings. Therefore you're cursed with a curse. You've robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring the tithes in the storehouses, that there may be meat in mine house. Prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing, there shall not be room enough to receive it. So they were robbing God of their tithe in Nehemiah and in Malachi. Okay, now look at Nehemiah 5. Nehemiah 5. All right, this is the passage being passed for our missionaries overseas, not part of our general collection, but special collection statement for them. About 440, about 434 or so here, verse 5, or chapter 5, verse 1. And there was a great cry of the people, their wives, against the brethren, for they said, we, our sons and our daughters, are many, therefore we take corn for them, we may eat and live. Some said, we mortgage our lands, our vineyards, and our houses to buy corn because of the dearth. They said, we borrowed money from the king for the king's tribute for our lands and our vineyards. Yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children. We bring bondage to our sons and our servants. So what's he doing there? Well, remember that under the old covenant, the children were not to charge usury of their own people. That was abuse of the poor, as far as God is concerned. So abuse of the poor, Nehemiah chapter 5. If you look at Malachi 3 and verse 5, he says, I have come to you to judgment. I will be swift witnesses against the sorcerers, the adulterers, those that swear false oaths, and those that oppress the hireling for his wages, the widows and the fatherless, and turn the stranger for his right. In other words, again, you've got the abuse of the poor. And I will not take the time to read the rest of it. I'll give you the verses. In Nehemiah 13, 23 through 27, the people are intermarrying with Gentiles. And in Malachi 2, verses 10 through 16, God condemns through Malachi the people intermarrying with Gentiles. In Nehemiah 13, 28 through 31, the priesthood was corrupt. And in Malachi 2, 1 and following, the priesthood is corrupt. But I do want to close out with the themes. First thing about the theme of Malachi, this is something I found very interesting. There are 55 verses in Malachi. The word God or Lord or Jehovah or He that refers back to God, Lord, or Jehovah in 55 verses, 53 times. It's pretty good. Second thing, there are 23 questions asked in those 55 verses. 23 questions. It's almost as if Malachi is trying to set us up for somebody who's going to come and start asking questions in a page or two. Maybe. But the main thing I think Malachi is trying to get across to us, this is something I want to really pound down on next week, is God loves his people despite of the way the present state of affairs appears. The overriding theme in chapter 1 he talks about is, when he starts, he's going to say that he loves his people. And they're going to say, where have you loved us? They're going to question God's love for them. We'll have a lot to say about that next week. I won't get into it right now. Lord willing. And then there's the danger of external religion. The danger of external religion. In Malachi 1:8, when they give their sacrifice, they're going to give the worst, not the best. If God asks for a lamb without spot, without blemish, what are they going to give you? And God's going to say, why don't you try to offer this till you go? See if you'll take it. You think you can get away with offering this to me? That is an external religion. Jesus talks about that in Matthew 23 when he says, first cleanse the inside of the cup. And he talks about how the Pharisees, they thought if you just cleansed the outside of the cup, everything was good. And he goes on to compare, he said it's like a graveyard. Whitewash on the outside, looks good. But if you open it up, rotten bones on the inside. Love money, but they don't love the God who gave them the means to make the money. You ever met anybody like that?
Oh, yeah. That's right.
No, not really. You can't. No, very good. Wow. All right, and then that's where we're going to go. Look at that story in Malachi chapter 1. We'll start talking about faithfulness. Malachi chapter 1. Thanks for your attention.
Yes, sir.
And I look forward to this little study. Thanks.